Hello again. This is a response video to a video called Lucy Letby, Statistical Smoke and Mirrors with John O'Quigley on the Amazing Academics channel, which was put up about 8 days ago. Well, it says 8 days ago here now. And I also received an email from Professor O'Quigley, who notified me that this interview, this discussion had taken place on the channel. I was originally going to share my thoughts about it directly in an email to Professor Quigley, but thought, why not make a video about it in order that I can bring to bear some of my thoughts about the discussion and the work that's been done, which is excellent. It's a fantastic video, or discussion rather, and look at the analysis made by Professor O'Quigley from his position, his standpoint as a mathematician and statistician. And it will allow me to bring in some other aspects that I've looked at before in previous videos, and also more recent developments that have happened. So I've made some notes, and I'll be referring to some of those and to some articles as well. I'll put the link to the Amazing Academics video below. So the interview on this video I'm talking about is between Dr. Philip Davies and Professor John O'Quigley. Quite soon after the video started, I'm just looking at my notes here, Professor O'Quigley started talking about this split between 25, relating it to the charts with all the X's down it that they used in court to impugn Nurse Lucy Letby. I'm going to make a definite effort after reading Rosie Jane's really instructive and I think important comment about the stripping away of Nurse Lucy Letby's title as a nurse. You know, I know it's been formally done, but it was wrongly done, and that to give, as Rosie Jane says, perhaps to begin with, I'll read her. I'll read Rosie Jane's. I'm just looking it up now. I made a post of it. Rosie Jane says, in terms of how Nurse Letby is referred to, and I put this as a post. So this is Rosie Jane 5292, who commented on a video I put up today. Thank you for your insight on this. Something that's popped into my mind is that the media has introduced the narrative that seems to be designed to degrade the staff working in the NHS and establish a new hierarchy. I feel that Lucy should be called Nurse Letby instead of by her first name. This would help restore some of the respect for her position and her qualifications as a nurse and member of staff, instead of a person who is known by Lucy Letby, who happened to be there because she's a nurse working at the hospital. Other members of staff seem to be able to retain the title they earned. I feel Nurse Letby deserves to be treated the same way as the other staff employed at the hospital are gifted. I am noticing a deconstruction of Nurse Letby's position through the process of her unjust persecution. This scenario has been developed by the media, who seem to be the most accountable, or to be most accountable for what they have produced to enable this injustice. So I thought there's a really strong point there. I responded to it. I know I've gone off the subject here a little bit, but I'll get back to it about the Professor John O'Quigley and Dr. Philip Davies discussion. But just to complete this, I personally, I don't like it when somebody's surname is just used, you know. I think that always shudders me in terms of, I'm not without a title, you know. So without doctor or nurse or Mr. or Mrs., just the surname, but I don't like it. It's just a very personal thing. So I try not to do that. I do use Nurse Letby's name, her first name, just on its own. But I think I put in my response to Rosie Jane that I think there's a kind of sense that we, the group of people that's growing all the time, exponentially growing, feel a kind of kinship to her, even when we don't know her personally. And it's a kind of sense of we're saying we want to be close to, we understand that, different people have been through all kinds of persecution themselves, and using her first name, it might be considered over familiar. But I think it's meant often in the spirit of feeling close and being friendly and saying this is someone that we care about, although we don't know personally. We care about her plight. So there's something there about that. But I really do want to take on board the stripping away of the title that Nurse Letby or Nurse Lucy Letby. I'm happy with either of those. I'm not saying what anybody else should say. I just want to take on board what Rosie Jane has said. I think it's important in the sense that that was the first thing they did to Lucy Letby, Nurse Lucy Letby. Nurse Letby is that they stripped her. Well, they didn't. It took a long time for through the Nursing and Midwifery Council to strip the title away formally, but they stopped her doing what she'd trained to do, what she'd worked to do, and what she was qualified in. They stopped her doing that. And then they put her in this admin role that she was not trained. That's not what she was there for. That's not what she'd given all her dedication for and all her efforts for. So that was the first principle undermining of her. And so what Rosie Jane is saying here in this comment, I think is very strong and powerful, is that Nurse Letby should still be Nurse Letby, should never have been, unless she had wanted to leave the profession, should never have been removed, that title, that as with doctor, should never have been removed. I'm quite happy to call Jayaram. I'm not going to bother with the doctor, or Breary. Sorry, I'm just not going to do it. No, I'm not sorry. Or Evans, because of who they are and what they've done, what I certainly believe they've done. Not going to do it. Or Hughes. It's just is Hughes to me. Evans is Evans, Breary is Breary, Jayaram, Gibbs, all these, anyway, I've gone off the point here a little bit, but I haven't, but that's a really important point in and of itself. I thought I might as well raise that as I'm trying to start anew, as it were, with that in mind, what Rosie Jane has said there in a comment. So that's why I try to read all the comments that I can and hear what everyone is thinking and all the points being made, really. So going back now to the video made by amazing academics with Professor John O'Quigley and Dr Philip Davies. Early on in the interview, Professor O'Quigley starts talking about a split between 25 cases being deemed suspicious by Evans, and then this idea that 36 were deemed not suspicious. So I was just wondering where does that split come from? I've never thought about that split in numbers like that. And I want to question it. I want to question it later. This is not a critique, it's not a criticism of the video or any of the work John O'Quigley's done. It's hopefully to be seen in the spirit of a conversation piece and a response in terms of a conversation piece, really. Slightly later in the video, I'll link it below, Dr. Philip Davies says, so the other 36 events you're talking about, Lucy was not present. And then I thought, well, I don't know that we know that or don't know that. But I want to interrogate what these 36 apparently non-suspicious events are that were deemed non-suspicious by Evans. And in fact, were they? That's what I want to question. Professor O'Quigley then says, in response to Doctor, it would really help if you watch the video, of course, but hopefully, even if you haven't watched the video, this will make some sense. Professor O'Quigley then says in response, something like that. It's a bit more subtle. So it just got me thinking, what does this mean? What's being spoken of here? So where it finally clicked, what this split between an alleged 25 or 25 alleged suspicious events, which is a mixture of crashes and deaths, and these 36 deemed not suspicious, whether that is the case or not, and I'll look at that in a minute. That total, that comes up to 61 so-called cases. Now, this is something I wanted to run by Professor O'Quigley, and other people have discussed this on throughout this whole period of investigation and looking at things, including Michael McConville in his early podcast with Peter Alston. What is a case? What does the word case mean, and is it being used consistently? Does a case mean an individual set of notes, an individual patient, a single individual child? Or can a case also mean an incident relating to a particular child? So therefore, can there be the case of the child with and then incidents, also called, confusingly, potentially, cases? So 3 cases about that one case. I don't know. I've taken it to mean, and this goes back to the figures now. So this full amount of 61 cases, which I'm taking to be not 61 events. Well, this is the trouble here. I'm already lost with the idea of the mixture of events and cases. This is what's confusing me about how it's being presented. Okay, in order to get through the kind of the briars here, Evans states, and then it ends up in the Court of Appeal document where they reject the main request for leave to appeal, the larger document for the main trial. It states in there, and Evans states it in many interviews post the main trial in 2023, that he was sent, sometimes he says 32 or around 30, but it seems to resolve to this figure of 33, and that's the figure that gets put in the Court of Appeal document, which is the rejection for the leave to appeal for all the cases, as it were. I'm not talking about the retrial of baby K here. So he sent 33 cases. So in that instance, I believe a case is an individual child rather than. And here is the rub. Herein lies the rub. Is that word being used consistently thereafter by Evans, by the Court of Appeal, by anyone looking at this matter? Is it being used consistently to mean an individual child rather than an incident in the notes of an individual child, so that you could have 4 cases for baby A, as it were, talking about incidents? I've always took it to mean that there were 33 cases, 33 separate children, sets of notes sent to Evans in the summer of 2017. So he gets those cases, and from which he chooses 15, so that's 15 children. Now, this is where it's getting complicated, because in the video that Professor O'Quigley does with Dr. Philip Davies, they're showing the chart, and the chart has got these 25 incidents on them. So an incident is either going to be the action which causes a death, or the action which is later deemed, or not deemed, an attempted murder. So they form the charge sheet. They form the trying to think of the other word. They form the indictment. They form the list in the indictment, all the charges. The problem with 25 incidents is that there's a disparity, because what we end up with is a list of 22 charges. That's not 22 cases, though. It's 22 charges. So there are multiple murder attempts alleged for certain babies, aren't there? And then what falls out of that? What falls out of that is Sorry, I'm having to refer to my notes here. So it gets reduced. There's 22 charges. So already that sheet of 25, if that's being used as the data to look at something, is being reduced by 3, which is a significant amount. And perhaps I'm just suggesting that might affect what is later done in the statistical analysis by Professor O'Quigley, if it had been reduced to 22 rather than being at 25, because it can't be 25 incidents. Otherwise, you'd have 25 charges, wouldn't you? Or, I mean, if they've shown a chart showing 25 charges in the court, 25 incidents rather, then that's obviously wrong. They shouldn't be doing that, because if they're not bringing a charge for those incidents, to do that would be completely dishonest, wouldn't it? Might as well show 400 there, mightn't they? And just say, oh well, we're not prosecuting any of these, but we want you to know that we still think, you know what I mean. It's anyway. Those 22 charges get reduced to on the charge sheet. There's 22 charges. It ends up with Lucy being convicted of 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. So that leaves 6 attempted murders where the jury is unable to agree. And there are 2 attempted murders where Lucy is acquitted. So that makes up the full 22. So that's looking at that 25 component that Professor Quigley is looking at from the chart. Now to look at this 36. So where's this 36 come from? That's what puzzled me to begin with. And then it clicked. And that makes a total of 61. Although I think it clicked. This is where it's a bit, I'm not 100% with this, but going back to what Evans was said to have been sent in 2017, 33 cases in the summer of 2017. Then, as per the Court of Appeal document, the rejection of the application for leave to appeal for for the main trial, it states in there that he was sent a further batch of 28 cases in 2018. Or rather, it doesn't actually stipulate the date in the Court of Appeal document, but I'll come to why I said that date in a minute. He sent a further batch of 28. So we have 33, and it happens to be in 2018, we believe. I'll say why in a minute. 33 and 28 is 61, which is the figure that Professor O'Quigley is working here, but he's splitting it up into these 25 on this chart that was used, which was obviously incorrectly used if it was 25, because there are only 22 charges that were brought. It should have only been 22 incidents that should have had an X by them, shouldn't there, if there are only 22 charges. And the remainder are this 36, because it adds up to the same figure, where I'm looking at it through the number of cases that were allegedly sent. We've got to hold all this in abeyance, or like under some through some screen of doubt, really. It's only what we've been told was sent. And even if it ends up in a formal document like the Court of Appeal document, is it necessarily true? Because I'll explain why I think there's so many doubts about all this, including the mortality statistics from the NHS as well. About everything. There's doubt about all the data. There's doubt about every aspect of the data here. And this is why I'm doing this conversational response to this video, to bring in some things I've done en route in previous videos. So there's this idea that then, and it's a brilliant thing that Professor Quigley's doing, because he goes through a sequence of using different charts and showing that comparing Nurse Letby with all the nurses is not the appropriate thing to do. It goes through a whole lot of sequences, and it eventually ends up with a comparison of a nurse, an imaginary nurse, or even potentially one that was there. That's a bit uncertain the way he describes that, where he said perhaps there were some there that were working as much as Nurse Letby. you've got to compare Nurse Letby with a nurse that's working, and I'm just taking the value that for granted that Professor Quigley said, more than a third on top of the average time all the nurses work. Work out the average time, add a third, and that's what you've got to compare. You've got to use that as your baseline of comparison between Nurse Letby and the likelihood of being there for 25 events, but really it should have only been 22. So that might affect what those graphs look like in a positive way for Nurse Letby, actually, in order to have a genuine comparator, rather than comparing Nurse Letby to a nurse that's only done a few shifts or worked part-time, which is absurd, which gives false comparators there. And that's why, another reason why that, and obviously this is what Professor Quigley and Dr. Philip Davies are discussing, what a fraudulent document that is, what a misleading, well, it's abysmal. So, I want to go, this is tricky because, I can't script all this, it'll take me weeks. I've just got to do it on the hoof, and if some people don't like it, then nobody has to watch it. It's the way I do it, it's just how I do it. And I probably repeat things because I think they're important. Anyway, I don't have to explain, do I? I don't think so. So, these 36, where I want to go now is this. So Professor O'Quigley creates this chart in which a imaginary or even potentially actual nurse that works a third more in time every week, like the usual the full shift, full time plus a third, or like a third more than the average nurse. So in other words, doing really long hours, same as Nurse Letby. Their likelihood of being around for 25 in this instance, even though I'm debating that figure because of the number of charges, out of these 61 total events that were originally allegedly flagged up. I've got to say allegedly for all of it, flagged up to the police and then to Evans, and even that's all debatable how that's worked. That another nurse doing a third more than the average nurse could equally cover the 25, would have 25 X's by their name. What I want to add to that, in respect of the chart that created that shows that, so it shows a line of this nurse working a third more than the average nurse, plus Nurse Letby's line, and they're running together. They're running in complete concert together, whatever the phrase would be. They're running not contiguously. They're like the same line, if you see what I mean. So it's saying, essentially, and it goes through a number of stages to get there, through these mathematical models and statistical models to get there. But that's where it ends up, to say, look, if you had a nurse working a third more than the average, whoever it was, they would, or presumably, well, that's another point. And I'm not sure in that video that Professor Quigley and Dr. Philip Davies make much of this or anything of this at all about why are they only, forgive me if they do, but I don't think they make a thing of the fact that only nurses are on the chart. So what you need a chart with everybody on it. It's easy for me to lose my track here because there's so many elements here to explain. This is why I was not sure how to do this. You need a chart, as many other people have said, you need all the doctors on there, but you need all the admin staff or anyone else who's able to get into that unit. And here's the wild card. You still don't know who's in and out of that unit at any given time. Allowing for the fact that, did they do a proper forensic analysis of all the door data? Well, we know they got the door data the wrong way round, so we can't trust them on any of the door data anyway. I'm talking about the CPS. But the wildcard element is that back door with a code to it. got a back door with a code to it, which I suspect, don't know, I suspect many people in that hospital, in other departments, will probably know that code, and it'll have got around, and it'll be one of those kinds of things in a large workplace. Oh, that's that. If you want the code for that door, that's it. It makes the unit porous. I don't think that they're going to be guarding that code with their life, and that only neonatal nurses and the doctors there, and all the people that only should be there will know that number. People are able to cut through there even to other departments, to the obstetrics department and so forth, because they know that door that leads down to the fire escape way, just like a 4-figure number. And it wouldn't be tracked, and you wouldn't know. It wouldn't have any door data that you could retrospectively look at and see who was where when. It blows apart the idea in and of itself, just that door existing with that number on it, without knowing 100% who does and does not know that number. You can't say definitively who is where when. You can't. Both for the staff that should be on the neonatal unit at any given time, and for other people that may want to cut through or whatever, or just visit a friend there, or so, whatever the reason. Back to the video, the John O'Quigley, Dr. Philip Davis video. When Professor O'Quigley said something like that, it's a bit more subtle, because Philip Davis says, Dr. Davis says, oh, these other 36 events you're talking about, is that where Lucy's not present? Well, we don't know that. We don't know that, and Professor O'Quigley says something like that. It's a bit more subtle. We never really learn what the subtlety is. But I want to introduce something here. Before I do that, before I do that, I want to finish the other point I was going for. The other point I was going for was that, as well as the average, a nurse that works a third more than the average, like Lucy, like Nurse Letby did, you have to factor in 2 other factors as well, which might make it even more likely that Nurse Letby would be around for deaths that happen, just happen to be working for deaths that happen. And this is, none of this is new. Other people have said this many times, many people over these last 20 months, whatever, is that she's working nights, and that there is a preponderance of deaths that happen in hospital during the nights and in the very early morning. So that's another factor that I don't think was built in to the statistical modelling that the Professor O'Quigley does. I'm not sure. I can't say that for certain, but it's not mentioned that it was. And I don't know what kind of weighting you would give to that, but a certain weighting would need to be given to that. And it's all working in Nurse Letby's favour in terms of saying, well, statistically, it's all making this idea of these X's all going down by Nurse Letby's name not impressive in any way whatsoever. We're not fooled by it. So that's one aspect of it. The second one, I think there might even be a third, but another one, the second one I'm going to talk about, is the fact that she's trained to a higher level. So she's going to be in charge of and being asked to look after more high acuity babies. So that's got to be yet another weighting that has to be put into any statistical model that would push her towards being more likely to be around particular babies, or on shift for particular babies, or being attached and assigned to particular babies that have higher acuity and thereby are more likely to sadly die or crash because they've got more challenges going on health-wise. And the third aspect here, which goes a long way back, I think goes right back to when we were doing the Science on Trial Zooms back in 2023. And it was something that Dr McLachlan said, I think both on his Substack and in one of the discussions there, one of the Zooms there, but certainly Dr McLachlan, Scott McLachlan of Law Health Tech Substack, who'd done amazing work all through, from very early on. He was talking about trying to work out some statistical model in which you would need to look at much more granular detail about where physically each nurse was in relation to different babies at different times, i.e., I think this is more or less what I remember it being. I don't know how you'd do it, but the idea was that you'd have to know, well, where each nurse was in each room, what babies they were assigned to, what other people were there, and give all these some kind of statistical weighting about the likelihood that they had opportunity even to be, and how much interaction, that was the idea, how much interaction they were having with these babies who sadly crashed, or even more sadly died, passed away. So there was that factor. So it's a model that you can keep refining, at least perhaps with more criteria to make it, and it's all in one direction. It's all destroying this chart more and more and more. Is the validity of it, or any power? It never had any power. It's a total fraud. But that's one of my responses to the modelling that Professor O'Quigley did. I'm not a mathematician, but I can see that you need to add, or potentially there's room to add these extra weightings in favour of, add them into the analysis in order to push away the false story that, oh, look at the extraordinary solid column of X's down here. How else can you explain it other than deliberate harm? Back now to this split of 25 and 36. Well, however it's split, it's not quite accurate because the chart's not accurate, because it should have only been 22 showing on there if there are 22 charges being brought on the indictment, shouldn't there? Anyway, this overall figure of 61, we've got 33 cases given to Evans in 2017 in the summer. I know this is it's a lot in my head. The Court of Appeal says he sent a second batch of 28 cases. I'm taking that, and why would I not, that they're using the same term to mean the same thing across different iterations. So every time they say case, they mean a separate set of notes, i.e. a separate child, not an incident, but a child, out of whose notes you could find potentially more than one incident if you were so minded, or if you did find them or not. Their case is a child, a set of notes. In the New Yorker article, when it came out in 2024, that seminal article, Evans says, and this is the link I made in previous videos, Evans says to Rachel Aviv that after the first arrest, which is in 2018, summer of 2018, isn't it? After the first arrest, he sent back 25 other suspected cases now to Cheshire Police. So where have they come from? They've come from that second batch of 28 that the Court of Appeal says that was his second batch that he was sent. And none of those go anywhere. None of those go anywhere at all. They're not followed up. They don't end up as any charges 7-8 years down the line, do they? Yeah, 7 years down the line. It gets worse. And this is what I've mentioned in previous videos. This idea of this 25 supplementary cases that go nowhere. But it's worse. Because according to Dr. Philip Hammond in The Private Eye, Evans tells him that he, Evans, sends another 25 cases in 2023. Yet another, he goes through all the documents he's got and sends another 25 cases. It's odd that it's the same figure. But it just raises so many questions about, is it the same 25? But he's saying he sent them 5 years apart. So just to recap, he tells Rachel Aviv in the New Yorker article, I sent 25 cases after the first arrest. Well, that doesn't mean 2023, does it? It means between the first arrest and the second arrest, which means between 2018 and 2019. Could be the last part of 2018 or first part of 2019. That's what that means, doesn't it? Unless he's lying to her, or unless Rachel Aviv has misunderstood what he said or put something down different from what he said. And then he tells, in an email exchange that he was having with Dr. Phil Hammond, who does those series of articles in The Private Eye, brilliant articles. He tells Dr. Phil Hammond, and Dr. Phil Hammond tells us on Twitter and in one of the articles that Dr. Evans told him that in 2023, Evans sent another 25 cases to the Cheshire Police, and none of them they're all no further action thus far. So we've got 50 potential cases here. And this is what I did 2 videos about, these 50 potential cases, and I sent that information, or that linking up of these, what Evans has said he's done, and linking it up with the Court of Appeal document, these figures of 33, then there's 28 cases being given to him in 2017, 2018, respectively. And I sent that to Peter Elston, who's obviously part of the Mark McDonald team. So going back to Professor O'Quigley and Dr. Philip Davis's video, this idea of these cases that remain being deemed not suspicious, and that Professor O'Quigley states something like that, it's a bit more subtle. Well, it's different to that because, and I don't know what those, if those extra 36, as he's done the split here in the numbers, refer to the bulk of, well, what do they refer to? They refer to some of the 33 original cases that Evans deemed as not suspicious, explainable, expected, but also must, because of the number of them, they must also apply to the vast amount or all of the 28 further cases that were sent to him in 2018, the second batch, in the second batch, he has told Rachel Aviv that he found almost 100% of them suspicious, 25 out of 28. Just to recap, his strike rate has gone up in terms of where he's seeing suspicion. And this is what I've done previous videos about. But this is good that I've got a chance to recap it in respect to this video, Professor O'Quigley and Dr. Philip Davis. It take years for me to write all this down, but I know what I'm talking about in terms of what I've read and seen. I hope this is clear. I hope it's clear. The problems here, the problems of all these sets of 25 and all these cases that go nowhere. And it feeds into this, what John O'Quigley's done in his work here, in that those 36 cases that he's talking of being left over as being not suspicious. Well, if we're to believe Evans, what he told Rachel Aviv, he's saying that the vast majority of them are suspicious. They're all nearly all suspicious, but they don't get any further action applied to them. One thing we don't know explicitly is why the police NFA'd them, no further action. Is it because Evans became so scattergun that in the second batch of so-called cases that were sent, the 28, he chose 25 of them, and for the majority of them, Lucy Letby isn't on duty. But we don't know that one way or the other. We don't know it's a known unknown. That's a known unknown. So then we have these other, we have, I don't know where he's getting all these. He must have been sent a third batch, mustn't he? Would he have been sent a third batch, Evans? He sent a batch of 33 cases in 2017. He tells us that. Court of Appeal document tells us that. 2018, he sent a batch of 28. He chooses 25 out of those. Out of the 33 from 2017, he chooses 15. 15 he chooses. That's what we're told. And so that means 18 he doesn't choose. The 2 that gets added in terms of 17 children that are on the indictment, 17 babies, are the 2 that are quote unquote found by Breary, but which were really flagged up by Dr. Z.A. a year before. Breary said to find them one night when he's looking through medical notes. So where I ended up when I emailed Peter Elston was this: taking him at his word and taking that the reporting is accurate from the New Yorker, Rachel Aviv, and Philip Hammond in the Private Eye, Subsequent to choosing 15 cases out of 33 as suspicious, i.e. 15 children, separate children, not events now, separate children, where there could be multiple events for certain children, Evans chooses a further 50. So that's a total of 65 cases he's chosen, only 15 of which, 65 cases he says he's chosen, he's told people that, unless they've made a mistake in there. This has been some kind of miscommunication. That's what Philip Hammond and Rachel Aviv told us. 50 cases have been sent to the police supplementary to the first 15 he chooses in December of 2017, after he's gone through them all and made his first set of reports from the first batch of 33. I hope this is clear. And those 50 go nowhere. Well, thus far, they've gone nowhere. Going back to the video, Professor O'Quigley, and this is something that they discuss in the video, is that, well, who's choosing what to send to the police / Evans anyway? Who's choosing it, and why are they choosing it? Obviously, the deaths are the deaths, but that's another massive problem, because how many deaths were there across this period of time? We've had this shifting data set, or these differential data sets from 2018 FOI, the Walid Aslam FOI that people were working from, was then deemed completely wrong in all sorts of ways. And then we had this so-called manual count that was made in 2023, producing new FOIs, in which the differential is from the 2018 data set, you go from 17 deaths down to 13. 17 to 13. But the 2018 data set of mortality had major problems in it, in that there were months in which it should show an early neonatal death, and it doesn't have anything there at all. So for a long time, I was working with the idea that there must have been at least 19 deaths across 2015, 2016. Because in August and October, there should have been an entry for an early neonatal death. This is in the 2018 FOI. What happens then in the 2023 so-called manual count across various platforms? That's how they describe it. And that's how in the complaint that's made by my correspondent to the BBC, Panorama answers that complaint. The BBC answers his complaint and said, that they did a review on it, etc. And then I've done separate FOIs now as well. And they've reduced it down. It all aligns very, very well and neatly with the indictment period and the indictment, really. And so those deaths in August and October 2015 are now back. They're back. Well, they're back now, where they weren't there in the 2018 FOI. And now there's a third figure of 18 deaths. So which is really not a conflation, but an addition. The 13 that they're saying has happened in this updated 2023, re-looking at all the data across these platforms, this so-called manual count. And then they've added 5 other on top of that. So they've added 4 deaths, and this is from the Thirlwall document, 4 deaths that happen that are related to COCH, in that the babies were there, but the babies passed away sadly, including baby K, in other units, and I think they're bound to be level 3 units. They were transferred out. And apparently the police are still looking into 2 deaths that didn't end up on the charge sheet or the indictment. They're meant to be open investigations into 2 deaths still. And there's also 1 death that happened in the birth suite, the obstetrics sort of, I can't remember the exact term they use, but where the babies are born, but not a stillbirth. So those 4 and that 1 adds up to the 18 figure that's on this Thirlwall document that they're working with now. So we've got this shifting number that's being used here, or at least we're meant to believe they got it really badly wrong in 2018, but now it's all correct. But I've got to ask you, or I ask myself, why should we believe it now? Why should we believe in its whole Why should we believe wholeheartedly in its accuracy now, after all those changes? So back to the idea about who's bringing these so-called cases to light. Let's look at crashes now. Crashes aren't formally recorded. They're not formally recorded, and we've had explicit acknowledgement of that. So Breary and others, but Breary with the draw of doom, he's doing it in an ad hoc fashion, en route. En route, he's building up this draw of doom of crashes, and other people are feeding into him. Oh, this looks suspicious, and Nurse Letby was on, etc. That's building up over all this time. But it's not only being done ad hoc, it's being done retrospectively as well, as with baby K. You know, I don't think the baby K is in the draw of doom. I think he can be added to the draw of the doom retrospectively when Jayaram remembers it suddenly after 13 months of keeping it to himself. Because Breary tells us at Thirlwall that he didn't know anything about it. He can't let it slip, can he? I think he was, well, I don't know what he was told. It's quite possibly he wasn't told by Jayaram, because from my last video, Jayaram's got up to that point, until he decides to use it as ammunition against Nurse Letby. It's actually something that he's worried that he knows he's responsible, he's culpable for, in terms of baby K. And all this is not to take account of something, again, a known unknown. I think it's safe to say it's not an unknown, although there are unknown parts of it. And that's the level of collusion between the consultants, Evans, and the police, in that they're all working this up all the time. And now you've got, and I've got it up on the screen here, and this is also mentioned by Professor O'Quigley, that the unheard article for David Rose from February the 1st, talking about the evidence that's come out from Detective Sergeant Janet Moore. However, they've come across these early notes which show clearly that Evans is kind of he's got the bit between his teeth, so much so that he's making mistakes. Is he making mistakes, or is he just whatever he's doing? He's saying that there is deliberate harm here, and they can't pin it on Nurse Letby, so they have to push it and let it go. In many instances, it should give the police, if they're acting fairly and honourably, the sense that they're dealing with a nutter here, and should not also be the case that he's raised potentially another 50 cases with them that they can't do anything with, also give them a clue that they're dealing with a nutter here. No, because it suits their purpose for him. He's their nutter. He's Cheshire Police's nutter, helping them get their nurse, get their woman in this particular case. So they're happy to work with him, and they don't care that, oh God, he's telling us here there's deliberate harm here, but we can't make it stick because Nurse Letby's not on duty. Well, we'll forget about that. They won't think that's exculpatory or undermining of his reliability. But I've been through that so many times. It's obvious that they're fully aware of his unreliability, but they're happy to work with it. Police are happy to work with it all and just get it all to work, frame it up, as was said in another video I watched today. Frame her up, frame Nurse Lucy Letby up, push aside anything that doesn't work, have 50 potential, 25 or even potentially 50 other designated suspicious harm incidents that come through to you can't do anything with them, and don't bat an eyelid about that. And when you got the early notes of Detective Sergeant Janet Moore showing that Evans was saying, oh well, this looks suspicious, there's deliberate harm here, they can't make it work, can't apply it to Nurse Letby, so they let it drop. Doesn't make them wake up to what he is. But the bigger point I wanted to make is that they're all in collusion. This is what I've said all along, right from 2023. They're all working together to make this fit. And going back to Professor O'Quigley's and Dr Philip Davis's discussion, I'm getting tired now. Discussion. Going back to that, the whole idea of what's suspicious, what is deemed unexpected, unexplained, vis-a-vis explainable and expected, is all a fraud in and of itself. So the very notion, and they do cover this, they do acknowledge this, I believe, in their video and in their analysis. They acknowledge that, and it's something that Dr. Davies says, actually. Dr. Davies says, when he says this, what does he say? He says something. Yeah, Dr. Philip Davies says, suspicious circumstances didn't point to Lucy Letby. Lucy Letby was being used to point to suspicious circumstances. I think I agree with that. At least to an extent. There's something about it, I'm finding it hard to grasp. But there's something in there with that. So back to John O'Quigley's work here, where he uses simulation of data using these 36 deemed, well, why are they flagged up in the first place? The majority of them are crashes, obviously. Why have they been flagged up to be sent to Evans anyway? We're in deep waters here because Professor O'Quigley is assuming that, or not, I'm not saying he's wholly assuming this, but he's treating them as though they've never been deemed suspicious, these 36 events. But as I mentioned already in this video, it's quite possible that Evans has deemed the vast preponderance of them suspicious, but they've not gone anywhere. And these are these 25 extra cases he sends to the police that he tells Rachel Aviv about. And then another 25, 5 years down the line in 2023 he sends. Maybe this is getting too long now. Yeah, so there's this idea of the simulating that data and making assumptions of randomness. I didn't understand that because I'm not a statistician. Creating a simulation model. That's beyond my understanding. But I understand the premise of it, of what Professor O'Quigley was doing, to where he gets to. The principal thing that I understand is where he gets to in one of the charts is that if you compare, you've got to compare apples with apples, oranges with oranges. You've got to compare Nurse Letby with another nurse who's working a third more than the average nurse works. But then, like I said very early in the video today, this one, you've got to add all these extra weightings on top of it. How you would model that, I've no idea how you would model it fairly and that you could justify the weighting. You know what I mean by weighting, the weight you'd give to the fact that Nurse Letby is working nights, the fact that she's got this extra training, so she's dealing with high acuity babies. And then the third, even more complex one to give a weighting to is what Dr McLachlan talked about a long time ago, in that you need to really model almost like incredible granular detail about wherever anyone was, how much interaction, looking all through the notes, how much interaction every nurse had with every baby across all, and not just the babies on the indictment, all of the babies. So you need all the medical notes, and you need to create a weighting for that as well. And you need to put all the doctors in there as well, and the locums, and the junior doctors, and the consultants, obviously, all the medical staff you need to put in there, and all the non-medical staff. And then the wild card of anyone who can actually get through that door with a 4-figure code as well. And that's a known unknown. You don't know what that even means. You don't know what that means. You don't know whether someone's coming into that unit from a different department altogether at any given time. So with the deep corruption and incestuousness of the consultants, the police and Evans, working this up, making it all fit, letting fall away what needs to fall away, even though Evans originally says it's suspicious, just let it drop, can't make it work, even though it's, You can see what I mean, can't you? Well, the essential thing about the chart is that it was presented as a discovery. And Evans says in the interviews, well, I told them what you need to do is get all the rotas and find out which nurses were on duty. Not the doctor's mind, just the nurses, right? I told them how to do it. Like the police needed him to do it, or nobody else would have thought it. But it's all fabrication. All of this is fabrication, because it's trying to present it as something, that chart, that it was discovered. Oh my God, we never would have realised Nurse Letby would have had all those X's down their name. They knew it before it was created. It's a construction, not a discovery. They knew what they were going to get before they got it. They didn't go, oh my God, that's just told us who it is. Because we know at the hospital themselves, they've been focusing on Nurse Letby all that time. So it's not any kind of discovery. It's a confirmation of what they've already decided. It's not even a confirmation. It's just what they've already decided anyway. The chart is an artifact of that original decision, of a bogus, false, fraudulent artifact of the original persecution and decision. Evans knew Nurse Letby was in the frame. He acknowledges he knew someone was in the frame and that they'd been taken out of the unit. When he said he's seeing case after case of deliberate harm, he's not looking for doctors. He's never been looking. He's not interested in doctors. He's looking for a nurse. And what's the most salient name that he keeps reading in all the cases that he believes over a cup of coffee in 10 minutes, even though he's ends up charging probably £1 million worth for all these crap reports. He can do one in 10 minutes. Why can't he do the lot in 150 minutes then for his first 15 cases? Why can't he do that? We're fed the falsehood that he's making blind choices. It's the absolute opposite of the truth. In the same way that Bowen's not making any blind choices. She's being fed Evans's reports and rubber stamping them. She's doing nothing blind at all. So there's no peer review. There's nothing to do with peer review there. It shouldn't have been done that way in any way at all. But I've probably said that about 400 times over the last 20 months. Bowen should have been sent 33, same cases, and left to get on with it without being told anything at all, obviously. But what they did is just send her Evans's reports and everything he'd done, and so she could mark his homework, and she knows that she's second fiddle in this. It's her first go at being a court-appointed expert, and she's not going to queer the pitch and saying, I don't agree with your principal expert. I'm his backup. I'm his water carrier. I'm his backup person. I'm his number B. So I'll fit in. That's what she's done. In the John O'Quigley and Dr. Philip Davis video at 31 minutes 15, I think it's John O'Quigley, Professor O'Quigley says, consultants, Evans and the police, and this is the quote, all working together. And that's it in a nutshell. And I was so pleased, this might not be the wrong word, but relieved to know that is the viewpoint, because that is what was happening. Obviously, that's what was happening. Evans was the idea with the pretense is that he's sequestered and he's being kept pure and doesn't know anything, so that when he does his genius analysis of the medical notes, the shabby notes that are all upside down or all out of order that he gets sent electronically, has to print them out, put them all in order, and he gets to work on it with his genius fingers and hands and eyes and mind. Evans now, he's doing it from a position of absolute purity and unaffected by what anyone else thinks or knows. And that's a load of absolute bollocks. All working together sums it up very well. Professor Quigley says at 44:28 in the video, one or two other nurses who may have been more present when Evans deemed something suspicious took place. Now, I don't know how Professor Quigley can surmise that or suppose that. It might be the case, because you've got to factor in now those 25, possibly even 50 other cases where he's sent those cases to the police in 2018 and then in 2023. That's what he tells people. And we don't know who was on duty across those. And were they dropped because Nurse Letby wasn't on duty for any of them, or not enough of them, or for some other reason, there's no further action for them. But you can see what a stark fraud it all is, can't you? Just a thing I remember that people have said en route, that, because they were doing a chart. Before there was the chart, there was the earlier chart that had doctors on it, weren't there? That Breary then removed all the doctors when he was doing some earlier kind of trying to find out. He already knew who he was after, but he was doing some kind of chart to make it look as though he's being fair about it. And then there was original chart, but then it was changed. All the doctors were taken off it. So there was that as well, wasn't there? But there was alleged people. I can't remember who it was. I don't know if the doctor was named. Maybe I don't want to name it just in case it's the wrong person. But there was a doctor that was there for a very high number of these allegedly suspicious events. But the whole notion of suspicious versus unsuspicious is suspicious in itself, is all incredible, as in not credible, in and of itself. That's a construction and a confection in and of itself. Everything about it is rotten. Everything about the idea of creating that chart is rotten. All the premises on which it's allegedly founded are utterly rotten. It has no foundation. It's built on prejudice. It's built on prior prejudice and an assumption about someone being somehow the person that we need to look at here because of this spike in deaths. I think I've come to the end of it now, of this video anyway. Thank you if anybody has stayed with me. I don't want to do these things. I don't want to script them. I've got to do them on the hoof, because things occur to me on the hoof, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, and it might be a bit hard to listen to. But then, nobody has to listen to anybody's video. I'm putting it out there because this is something I feel strongly about, and I wanted to respond to Professor O'Quigley's video with Dr. Philip Davis, and this is the best way I thought to do it. And it's not in the spirit of criticism, it's just wanting to add to it, add my thoughts to it, and act in sort of conversation with it, and bring to bear some of the other aspects that I believe that I have ideas about and suppositions about and thoughts about en route, to do with the mortality data, to do with this notion of these 25, possibly 50 other cases that were flagged up to the police that go nowhere, and all those factors and all those other factors of potential weighting that you need to add into that Lucy Letby is not an ordinary nurse there. Nurse Letby is not an ordinary nurse there, doing the most hours, working with the most high acuity babies, doing the most nights. So, and then this idea that from Dr Scott McLachlan of doing something incredibly fine detail about every interaction that every person, as much as you could possibly glean, and it will only be limited from the medical notes, to say how much real close interaction had each person. And this is something he posited in one of the early Zooms, and things fell apart with that Zoom there, and Dr McLachlan went on to do his own. He was doing it anyway, his Substacks about it. But I thought his argument there, because I was there for that Zoom back in the autumn of 2023, and it was kind of his idea about that. Statistically, it was kind of, sadly, unfortunately, it wasn't properly acknowledged by Sarita Adams at the time, and that's kind of pushed, and totally understandably pushed Dr Scott McLachlan away from that interface with science on trial, which I totally understand. And I'm not, and I know I know Sir Rita Adams has done some really excellent work as well on the side. So it's not about that. It's just that kind of potential analysis there statistically is still there potentially to be done. But I think Professor O'Quigley in the work he has done there, and what obviously what Professor Richard Gill has done as well. It's a piece of crap. The chart is a piece of crap. Always was a piece of crap. Always was a lie. Always was a fraud. And all these people with mathematical and statistical backgrounds, and the other lady, I keep forgetting her name. Is it Hutton? Mrs. Hutton? So sorry, I can't remember her name. But the one that the CPS said, "Oh no, whatever you do, don't do that," or whatever. Drop that idea. Drop the idea of getting a statistician involved. Dr. Hutton. It was always a nonsense. It's always a piece of. It was a coup de théâtre in the court to show that chart and then to put it in the newspapers as well. It was one of the most rotten lies around this, and in a whole barrel of rotten lies. This is a very long video now. I've got to stop. I've got to have a cup of tea. Thank you if anyone has lasted all the way through this, and it's sounding really good about the the meeting on the 17th of March in Liverpool. Take care. Bye-bye.